What's going on, zombies gamers? It's Epic here. Welcome back to another Black Ops 6 Zombies video on the channel. Today, we are going to be doing a tier list of every single augment in Black Ops 6 Zombies at launch. So, a few things to note for this video. Firstly, anything we rank isn't going to be a collective ranking. I'm not ranking one augment as the overall best out of any augment in the game. Rather, we're going to be ranking the augments based on the group they're found in. So, for example, if I give Firebomb an S tier, for example, for Napalm Burst, it doesn't mean it's one of the best augments in the game, it just means it's one of the best for Napalm Burst. So just wanted to get that out of the way. And also, while we are going to be going category by category, we're not going to be going in order. So for example, we're going to start with the ammo mod augments, but we're not going to go down the list in order. We're going to jump around to keep the video feeling fresh. And just two more things. Firstly, because the game reuses augment icons, we're not going to show the tier list on screen because it would be really confusing. And also, I'm not going to have gameplay of every single augment because that would take me God knows how long to acquire every single clip and properly convey what it does in the video. So with that, sit back, relax. If you're playing zombies right now, I hope I can be a good accompaniment to your game, and I hope that you're hitting some high rounds or doing well on your Easter egg or speed run. And yeah, just sit back and enjoy my ranking. Remember, these are just my opinions from what I've tested so far, but if you guys disagree or have your own takes, let me know in the comment section down below. And also, a big shout out to Chadley99 for helping me with some of these augments, because this was a lot of work. And so let's get into it by starting with the big game augment for every ammo mod. Because there are shared mods, we're going to start with those first, and I'll give my take on what each of them do for the respective upgrade. So starting off with Brain Rot, big game allows Brain Rot to be triggered on elite enemies, and I have this ranked at D tier. Out of the Brain Rot augments, I do think that this is D tier because in my experience it is super inconsistent and not worth running over any other augment. While it could be handy in theory, I could see some use out of big game for Brain Rot, I would never want this over anything else, so it's in D tier. Next we will do big game for Cryo Freeze, which allows it to slow elite enemies. You'll notice that pattern here. And for this one, I've actually got it ranked at A tier. I actually do think that this is very good for stunning elites if you need it to be. While Cryo Freeze isn't my favorite, and actually it's probably my least favorite AAT, I will say that it is good for elites if you do get big game on Cryo Freeze. Would I recommend that you use Cryo Freeze with big game? No. But if you are, I think you'll be in safe hands. Moving on, we have Deadwire, which again lets it stun elite enemies. And for Deadwire, I have the big game mod ranked at E. I think this augment is awful on Deadwire. I don't think I'd ever want to put big game on Deadwire, especially given the other mods on there, and I don't think I would want to stun elites with it either, especially at high rounds. Now, I think this one might be a little controversial, so I'm interested to see what people think, but for me, yeah, I would never want to use big game on Deadwire. It is an E tier. Next, on Napalm Burst, we have big game at an even worse ranking. I have big game at F tier. For me, in my experience, from what I've seen on round 50 or round 40 even, big game is rarely ever needed on Napalm Burst, and if anything is pretty damn useless against elites. Even when it does set them on fire, it doesn't do a whole lot of good, and there's a lot of elite spam in this game at the higher rounds. I would not take big game on Napalm under any circumstance. And finally, we have big game for Shadow Rift, and now I've got this one ranked at C tier because I do think it could be useful, but in my honest opinion, it's rarely ever helpful fighting against elite on high rounds. And I think if I was training and I hit an elite with Shadow Rift and it teleported it, because let's face it, there's no way it's just going to one-tap it all of the time, it could mess up my train and get me downed, which I don't want. So with that out of the way, that is going to do it for the big game augments of the ammo mods. Now we can get into the more out of order unique augments, and we're going to start off with Napalm Burst, and this one is going to be Contact Burn, which allows the initial burn effect of napalm to deal more damage. Now, I have got Contact Burn at A tier. To avoid the video running over for too long, I'm not going to go too in depth with these augments, but what I will say is that Contact Burn is a solid damage increase and works well with other augments on Napalm Burst. Now, moving on, let's talk about Shadow Rift, because we're going to talk about the explosive rain augment. This one one is very interesting because had this not had a decent combo with other augments, it would be sitting at B or C tier. However, I have explosive rain at A tier because when paired with the targeted augment, which we'll talk about soon, this becomes very handy for crowd control and just in general getting kills. But without targeted, I could honestly say it's probably F tier. It's really bad, hardly ever hits anything if at all. Don't get this unless you have targeted. And I guess we'll make this a 2-for-1. While we're here, we will talk about targeted too, because it is exactly the same as explosive rain. It is completely and utterly a F tier mod without explosive rain. And also going forward, before I forget, let's start explaining what these augments do. I should have been doing this from the start. So explosive rain makes it so that enemies dropped from portals will explode on contact with the ground. When you pair this with targeted, which makes the dropped enemies fall on other enemies, you basically have homing missiles for your AAT. Now, moving on, let's talk about Brain Rot and the explosive augment. This makes charmed enemies explode at the end of Brain Rot's duration, which will deal toxic damage to nearby enemies. Unfortunately, for the news of all of you explosive lovers out there, I have it at C tier. It is almost even D tier. While explosive is a very cool idea, I think it needs more splash radius. It's very inconsistent and not worth running a lot of the time, even though it can be handy, especially if you've got a ton of charmed enemies. I don't think that explosive is worth running under any circumstance, honestly, just because there are better options just outright. But I wouldn't be mad if you did run explosive, because it is cool and it does, I guess, have some use cases. Next up, we have the extension augment. This basically exists for every AAT apart from Shadow Rift, and it just increases the duration that they are active for, or increases their effectiveness in some way. So, making it very simple, I have this ranked at B tier for every single AAT. Is it terrible? No, it is not terrible. Are there better choices? Yes, there are. I would not be mad if I saw someone running this, but for me, I would not run it in my loadout. I don't think that extents is something that I really need. Now, back to Napalm Burst, because we're going to be talking about the one and only Firebomb augment. So, this major augment makes burned enemies explode on death, and it can spread the fire that they drop to nearby enemies. So for Firebomb, I have this ranked at A tier. This is really good for crowd control and a solid augment overall. And then moving on, we have Freezer Burn, which is an augment for Cryo Freeze. So I have Freezer Burn ranked at S tier. The more damage it gives you is great, and it helps a ton with mobbing. In case I didn't already explain what Freezer Burn does, it increases your damage to frozen enemies. So all in all, this is going to be a really solid damage increase for your games, which is also very good when you're running AATs, period. So if you are a Cryo Freeze enjoyer, then I would highly recommend you get the Freezer Burn augment. And now moving on, we are still on Cryo Freeze here. We're going to be talking about Frozen Stiff. This is going to freeze enemies in place when you hit them with the mod, and I've got to be honest, I have got Frozen Stiff at C tier. While it's not a horrible augment, it's just not the best augment either, and that's going to be common ground with a lot of what we're ranking. It just loses on a lot of these arguments because it's just not that great compared to other stuff. Now, next we have Haste, which basically just increases the cooldown, or reduces rather, the cooldown of some of your AATs. Now, for Brain Rot, I have it ranked at B because it's good, but it's just not necessary. For Deadwire, I have it ranked at B because while it can be useful, it's not the best. Again, compared to other augments, this is going to be said a lot with this video. But finally, with Shadow Rift, I have a little twist here because I have Haste ranked at A. It is good for constant activations during rounds, and it is a really solid augment to run on Shadow Rift. I like this. Now, moving on, we're going to be going back over to Deadwire here. We're talking about high voltage. This just makes Deadwire deal slightly more damage, and I really like it, but overall, I don't think it's that crazy, so I've got it ranked at B. It is really good, but Deadwire is best it's used for stunts, and I'm not really using Deadwire if I'm trying to just kill stuff really quickly, so I can't see myself running high voltage a lot of the time, but it is fairly decent. Now moving on, we have a Cryo Freeze augment, and we're going to be talking about Ice Cloud. Ice Cloud is a really interesting one because it doesn't proc all the time, but when it does, it is really powerful. I have got this at A tier. It is really good for mobbing, but it is just slightly inconsistent. Okay, so next up we have another Napalm Burst augment. This one is going to be Incendiary. It basically makes it so that every time the fire ticks, it has a chance to spread to nearby enemies, and I have got Incendiary ranked at B. While it seems good on paper, it is fairly decent, but I will say in my experience, I haven't seen too much result. It's kinda inconsistent, and when it does proc, it doesn't do too much work. Maybe I'm missing the boat on this, maybe there's some crazy interaction I haven't found yet, but Incendiary, while it's decent, I don't think it deserves anything higher than B just yet. Now, let's go back over to the Deadwire augments. Today we're going to be talking about Lightning Strike. Lightning Strike is an S tier augment. It is really good. Pretty much the last augment you're going to unlock on Deadwire, and for good reason. This I have seen stun an entire area of zombies. Like the entire bowling alley on Liberty Falls, all of them stunned at once when it procced. The radius this has is really insane, and it's a good way of setting up headshots if you're going for them as well. Lightning Strike is very good. And now rubber banding back over to Cryo Freeze, we're going to talk about Liquid Nitrogen. So Liquid Nitrogen makes the chance of Cryo Freeze activating a lot higher, and I have this ranked at A. It is really solid, not too much to say about it. More uptime is going to lead to more hordes of frozen zombies, so yeah, I really like Liquid Nitrogen for Cryo Freeze as well. Just an overall solid augment that I would recommend. Now jumping back to Brain Rot, we actually have two that I want to talk about. So the first one is going to be Pheromone. So Pheromone, in my opinion, is hands down the best major augment that Brain Rot has to offer. It is an S tier. It basically turns your brain rotted zombies into monkey bombs, and with the amount you'll be proccing Brain Rot, I don't see a reason not to take this. It is extremely good. Something which I thought was going to be really underwhelming and just something I would never need, but wow, the reach on the amount of zombies this thing can grab is really impressive. And while I do like Plague, which we are about to talk about, I do think Pheromone is just outright the best augment for Brain Rot. But moving on to Plague, let's talk about that as well. Plague is A tier for me. Plague makes it so that charmed enemies can turn other enemies into charmed enemies too, or brain rotted enemies. It's basically just a massive chain of zombies turning each other, but for me it's A tier purely because Pheromone exists. If Pheromone wasn't an augment and there was just another mid augment here, Plague would be S tier. It is really good. Like, if you don't like Pheromone, then just use Plague. I wouldn't recommend using Big Game on Brain Rot ever. I would only ever go for Pheromone first, Plague second. They are super solid augments. And speaking of super solid augments, we have Supermassive. This is an augment for Shadow Rift, which makes the Singularity's lethal radius increased, and it allows it to kill more enemies. This is an A tier augment. Nothing crazy to say about it. It's just really solid and a pick that I'd recommend taking. Next up in Shadow Rift, we have Topple Danger. This makes it so that when an enemy is hit by Shadow Rift, it's going to warp one of them to others nearby and deal shadow damage. It's going to knock enemies down, and the special enemies are going to be stunned. Now, Topple Danger for me is a C tier augment. I think it's really good for stuns, but rarely ever needed in your loadout just because Explosive Rain exists. And like I said earlier, if you're not running targeted with Explosive Rain, there's no point in running Explosive Rain. So if I were going to run something in my top slot, it would be Explosive Rain, because I'd also be running targeted. So yeah, for me, this is definitely going to be a C tier augment. And finally, wrapping up the alternate ammo types, we're going to be talking about the last one here for Napalm Burst, which is Thermite. Thermite is a augment for Napalm Burst, which increases the burn effect damage for the mod. Now for this, I have Thermite ranked at A tier. It goes hand in hand with the contact burn augment, and it's really solid for a damage increase. There are other things that you could run over it if you really wanted to, but for me, this is an A tier. So that is going to wrap up all of my rankings for the alternate ammo type. types. And next we're going to talk about the field upgrade augments, because there's some really interesting ones here. So kicking off the field upgrades, we're first going to start with the extra charge augment. This exists for multiple of these field upgrades, and it basically does the same for all of them. It's fairly self-explanatory, so I'm going to rate them for each one. Firstly, for the energy mine augment, I have extra charge ranked at A tier. This is very, very beneficial. Energy mine is just all around a mobbing king. It is really, really good for clearing hordes, even on high rounds, due to the scaling damage, and an extra charge is almost always a benefit for this org. It's so good. For the Aether Shroud field upgrade, I have this ranked at C tier. No real crazy reason here, other than I just don't think it's all that worth running on Aether Shroud, but if you wanted to, you absolutely could. And this is also going to apply for the last one, which is the Frenzied Guard field upgrade as well. I also have it at C tier here. So that's going to do it for the extra charge augment. Now let's talk about the extension augment. This basically just extends the amount of time that your field upgrade is up for, and is also on numerous field upgrades too. Also, I keep forgetting to say field upgrade. We're just going to say action skill. It's so much more natural to me. So coming in first, we have extension for Frenzied Guard, and I have this at S tier. Extension for Frenzied Guard is just an all-around plus. There is almost no downside to running it unless you accidentally fat finger and pop this without wanting to. It is a great augment and a solid pick. And this doesn't just apply to Frenzied Guard, because we're also going to apply S tier on the extension augment for Aether Shroud. Aether Shroud, in my opinion, is just better than Frenzied Guard. I get more use out of Aether Shroud, but regardless of what I think, this is an S tier here as well. S tier on extension for Frenzied Guard and Aether Shroud. Highly recommend. And then finally, the last action skill that has an extension augment, to my knowledge at least, unless I'm misremembering any here, is the Dark Flare action skill. And I have extension ranked at C tier, mainly because Dark Flare is still god awful even when you apply extension. Dark Flare is genuinely terrible, and we are going to be ripping on it for the rest of this section. By going into our first actual augment, which is Broad Beam for the Dark Flare action skill. And let's kick this off nice and spicy. It's E tier, because from my use, it is barely noticeable, and it doesn't even make Dark Flare good, because Dark Flare is really, really bad. Now, moving along, we have Burst Dash for the Aether Shroud action skill, and basically Burst Dash makes you skip forward when you use Aether Shroud, but I really am not a big fan of this. I've got this ranked in at C tier. I do not like Burst Dash. From a zombie's IQ standpoint as well, it makes me really nervous about dashing into a group of zombies and then maybe some of them don't die and I just insta down. I would not want to use this. I would put this lower if I wasn't taking into account that I know some people will get a good use out of this, but for me, it's just not doing it. Now, moving on into the energy mine, we have an augment here called Carousel. It basically takes your energy mines and has them rotate around you until something comes near, and then when it does, they will explode. And Carousel I have ranked at A tier. While it's not what I would like to run on energy mine, it is good for passive protection, especially during boss encounters and any other thing where you might need, just in case a zombie comes up behind you, just some way to get rid of it without having to turn around or anything like that. So I've got it at A tier. I think it's really, really solid. Not the best by any means in my opinion, but Carousel, very good. Now, jumping back over to Dark Flare momentarily, just to hit on it some more here, we've got the Dark Pact augment. It makes it so that the beam can heal and revive other players on contact, and I really, really do not like this. I have Dark Pact ranked at C. It is useless in solo, at least to my knowledge, and it's also super inconvenient if there's zombies surrounding your teammate too, because again, Dark Flare just does not kill anything. It is so incredibly bad. I genuinely, it's shocking how awful a brand new skill can be. I just don't understand that. So I've got it at C tier. Don't use it. Don't use Dark Flare in general. But moving on, we have Enduring Radius. This is going to be an augment for the Healing Aura action skill, and it's really, really decent overall. It basically makes it so that the beams and the healing just persist longer for you and your teammates, and I've got this at A tier. It's not really anything crazy, but it is just super solid, and I can't really think of a downside to it, so that lands it into A tier for me. Now, next up, we are going to be talking about Frenzy Fire. This is an augment for the one and only Frenzy Guard action skill, and I really like this augment. I'm gonna give it an S tier. It's really nice. It makes it so that while you're in Frenzy Guard, you basically have stock option where everything is just taken from the stock of your weapon, and this can be incredibly powerful if you're doing, say, a boss fight, for example. So if you're in the boss fight of Terminus, facing that final boss, and you've got like the Sigma on, you can pop this with Frenzy Fire and just spam away. I really like this augment. Now, jumping back to the Energy Mine action skill here, we have the Frequency Boost augment. This makes the detonation count and duration of Energy Mine increase, and for Frequency Boost, I've got this in surprisingly at A. It is really good and very handy for the turret augment, which we're going to be talking about very soon. It's hard for me to call this bad, and I would recommend it overall. Go ahead and get this augment, it's nice. Now, next up, we're going to be going over to Aether Shroud with the Group Shroud augment. This makes it so when you pop your Aether Shroud, nearby teammates are also cloaked, and without any surprise, I've got Group Shroud in at S tier. It is really great, especially because for your teammates during a boss fight or an encounter or any situation where they're in trouble, you could just pop this as a get out of jail free card, and it's really strong. This is a nice augment, and I would recommend it. Sorry to cut the celebration short, but we're gonna jump back to Dark Flare here for the heavy shadow augment. I'm never happy when I have to talk about Dark Flare, but it makes it so that the beam slows enemies on contact. It's B tier. Heavy shadow is B tier. It is a decent augment for Dark Flare, but it's not really that worth running, especially because this action skill is already so incredibly slow, and to use then something that slows enemies with it, it's just depressing. It's depressing. It is depressing having to use this skill. Please fix it, please. Anyway, on another great note, back to Healing Aura with Inner Strength. Inner Strength is just so good. It is so good. It basically just means that when you pop your Healing Aura, you get a damage boost. It's great. It's an S tier. It's really good. It's just a passive buff that you can slap on and forget about. It's hard to say there's anything bad going on here. It's just good. But anyway, let's move on to the next one, which is Aether Shroud with the instant reload augment. It basically means that when you pop your Aether Shroud, it's going to reload your weapon instantly, and I've got this at C tier just because if you're using Aether Shroud as a means to reload, it's almost just as fast as reloading normally, unless you're using maybe like an LMG. I just can't see a use scenario where I'd ever want this. I could put it lower, but again, I can't speak for everyone, and it's not crazy bad by any means. It's just one of those utilities that exists, and I don't really know why. Now, moving on to another augment inside of Healing Aura, we're going to be talking about Persistence. Now, Persistence is a very good augment. If you're unaware of what Persistence does, it basically just ensures that when you revive players, they keep all of the perks on their bleed out bar, and there's not too much to say about this other than that it's just incredible if you're in co-op, but otherwise you can go ahead and skip this. I did want to put it lower because, again, if you're not playing co-op, I don't see a good use case for this, but if you are in co-op, I think it would be really good for Easter eggs especially, and boss fights. Like, the boss health in this game on Terminus, for example, does not mess around, so if you go down in that fight, it can be pretty bad for your team, and yeah, this would be a great use case. Now, next up, we have another Frenzy Guard augment. This one is going to be called Phalanx, and it makes it so that allies can also repair armor from kills while near you. I'm going to go ahead and put this in A tier. Very nice, almost kind of crazy if you think about it, but having your teammates near you basically repairing their armor as they're dealing damage, especially if you had a whole team of Frenzy Guard people, really nice overall. I gotta say, a very good augment here. Go ahead and grab this. Next up, we're jumping back to Healing Aura. This is going to be the Protection augment. It makes it so that healed players have their damage slightly mitigated for a short time. Now, unfortunately, in the case of Healing Aura, I have got Protection at B tier. I do think it's pretty decent decent, but I don't think it's the most worth augment that we're going over. So sadly, it is going to land itself into B tier. I don't have crazy things against it, but I'm just not really for it. Let's go ahead and do a little ping-ponging here. Let's jump back to Frenzied Guard and let's talk about Rally. On activation, it makes it so that you're repairing all nearby allies' armor to full. When you pair this with Phalanx, I think it would be really, really nice. I'm going to go ahead and say that this is an S tier augment. I really, really do like Rally here. I would highly recommend putting it in your loadout. Very, very nice bonus to have. And while we're here, screw it, let's talk about repair boost as well. It just makes you repair more armor per kill, like we were just talking about Phalanx. And overall, this one's decent. I'll give it an A tier because I can't really think of a huge downside with it. And yeah, I mean, nothing too crazy to say about this, but yeah, A tier, very decent. Frenzy Guard augments all around are fairly decent. There isn't any that I'm like, wow, this is just crazy bad. Frenzy Guard is fairly solid, and so is the augments for it. But next up, let's jump back to Healing Aura and let's talk about Resilience, the tier 1 major augment for Healing Aura, making it so that all affected players have their health regen delay reduced and their rate of healing increased. Let me tell you something about this. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, Resilience is 100% an A tier augment. The healing on this is great and it makes staying alive super easy, especially on high rounds. I have got to recommend Resilience to you. And one more time, let's jump back over to Frenzied Guard and let's talk about Retribution. This triggers an explosion on activation and it knocks down enemies near you. Now, I gotta say, this for me is going to unfortunately be an E tier. I really do not like this augment. I just think when you've got Frenzy Fire and Phalanx, it's lucky that I didn't put this into F tier. I don't see why you would ever want to run Retribution, and I actually think it's just straight up a waste of a slot. Do not use Retribution. I am not a fan. But I am a fan of this next augment. It's the one and only Scatter augment for Energy Mine. It makes your Energy Mine scatter into 3 pieces and then detonate individually, and I really like this one. I've got Scatter ranked at A. It's ideal if you accidentally have the mine triggered prematurely, because if it kills just one zombie, that's fine. You still have other detonations ready to go on it. So I really do like Scatter, and yeah, it's in an A tier for that. But don't go anywhere. We're not leaving Energy Mine just yet. We're also going to talk about Siren. It makes your Energy Mine attract nearby normal enemies for a short time. Now, this has got A tier, but I do have something to mention on this. So Siren acts like a singularity, pulling enemies in when you cast it. However, don't equip this with turrets or it drops to F tier. I have it at A tier, but with the turret augment, it turns Siren into F tier, just borderline F tier. It is not worth running together. Do not do it. That is a waste of a slot. However, if you're running Siren with literally anything else on Energy Mine, it is A tier. It's very good and great for crowd control, especially on high rounds. Really nice, especially if you pair it from Brain Rot earlier. It's really good, just really good. Now next up, we have Healing Aura's Stoic Presence augment. This makes it so that on activation, special and elite enemies near you are stunned and normals are knocked down. I've got this at B tier because while I can see why it would be helpful, it just, to me, it's like if you were gonna use an upgrade to save yourself, it would be like Aether Shroud. It wouldn't really be this. I don't know why you'd waste a slot on this, especially with everything else Healing Aura has to offer. Yeah, I can't recommend Stoic Presence. And unfortunately, we now need to jump back to Dark Flare because we're going to talk about Supernova here. Supernova is a major augment which makes the beam get replaced with a sphere that damages nearby enemies as it travels. And unfortunately, crazy turn of events here, I'm gonna give this an S tier. The reason I'm giving this an S tier is because it is the only augment which seems to make Dark Flare do anything useful for the team, but it's still just terrible. I mean, it turns Dark Flare into a somewhat usable action skill, but all in all, it's not that great, like, at all. Even though Supernova, you know what, I'm done talking about this, let's just move on. We got 2 more to go here. The first one we're going to talk about is Void Sheath on Aether Shroud. It basically makes you swap to your melee weapon, and then the kills you get with your melee weapon, you are able to recharge Aether Shroud with, but you can't swap away from your melee, which is why I'm going to give this an A tier, because it is great for melee builds. However, if you're not doing melee builds, if you're not a melee player, if you're not going to upgrade your melee in the game, don't use this. Don't use Void Sheath. It drops to an F tier because it is made for playing melee, and if you don't know what you're getting yourself into, you're just wasting your time. But anyway, let's go ahead and wrap this up by talking about the last augment, which is going to be the Energy Mines Turret Augment. This is an S tier. It is really, really, really good. It basically turns the energy mine from a mine into a turret, which actually does have an ammo capacity. I don't know what the exact value is, but it lasts and can last round upon round upon round before it goes away, and you can have a max of 3 of these turrets up at once, just blasting enemies. Now, what I will say about this is that if the enemies are really fast, it can be hard for the turret to track them, but for stuff like the lockdown on terminus or the bomb diffusal on terminus or any other situation where you might need to be covered, even doing the water valve step on Liberty Force, this is a really, really good augment. And if you've got energy mine on, you just can't really go wrong with turret. In fact, there are games that I will just run energy mine specifically for the turret and its utility, and on high rounds as well, the damage of it scales. It's just always going to be worth running. Turret is very, very nice. Even for boss fights, it's just great. An all-around incredible augment and a great way to end the field upgrade / action skill portion of my rankings. And with that, let's get to the most exciting part of the video by talking about perks. We are going to be talking about perks. We saved the best for last. There's some really great ones in here, so let's get going. Now, starting off with the perks, we are going to be taking a look at Elemental Pop's Chillberry Augment. This is going to reduce all ammo mod cooldowns, and straight up, I have got Chillberry ranked at S tier. This augment is extremely good, and it is really good, especially if you have something like Brain Rot using that Monkey Bomb functionality. I would highly, highly recommend Chillberry, so great start to the perks here. Now, staying inside of Elemental Pop, we're going to be talking about the first major augment, which is Citrus Focus, and yet again we are off to another great start. Citrus Focus is an S tier augment. It makes it so that if your weapon has an ammo mod apply, Elemental Pop, instead of doing a random element on activation, is going to just reactivate your AAT, and this is extremely good for spamming your ammo mod, especially if you've got a nice combo set up. Again, going back to the usage of maybe Brain Rot with the Monkey Bomb functionality or Explosive Rain targeted on Shadow Rift. So absolutely S tier, very deserving of it, and let's move on. Next, we're going to jump over to Speed Cola as we talk about the classic Formula Augment. This is going to up the bonus that you get from Speed Cola, making you reload even faster, and we are on a triple spree here of S's because this is yet again an S tier. A great buff that further makes Speed Cola incredible to have on you. There's really no downside to taking this, as there isn't really with any of the augments in this game, but I would really, really recommend the classic formula of Speed Cola. It is really, really good. Next up, we're going to be going over to Stamina Up as we take a look at the Dasher Augment. I've got this ranked at C tier. Dasher makes your tactical sprint duration increase, but honestly, I've never really been in a spot where I needed a longer tac sprint, and I don't see this helping me out too much in gameplay either. Not something I like to pick up and not something I'd recommend. Now, next up, we're going to talk about Dead Again. This is a Deadshot Daiquiri augment, which makes critical hits have a chance of adding bullet to the magazine. Now, for Dead Again, I've got this ranked at A tier. It is a really solid augment, and it could be useful for SMGs or anything where ammo is an issue keeping up. Not quite S tier for me, but I would recommend this overall. I am a pretty big fan of the idea of Dead Again. And because all of the Deadshot augments all start with Dead, we are just going to stay in here for the meantime. So the next one we're taking a look at here is Dead Break, which increases damage to armor pieces. We are back to S tiers here. Dead Break is an invaluable augment given how many enemies have armor in this game. It is really, really good. It feels wrong to put this anywhere but S tier. Something I would really recommend overall. I'm a big fan of Dead Break. And now let's move on to Dead Draw, which is going to reduce your hip fire spread. For Dead Draw, I have this ranked slightly lower at B tier. I am not a fan of Dead Draw. While I can see it being useful, it's overall not worth running in my case. I'm not a big fan of this one at all, so sadly Dead Draw does land itself in B tier. Now back up to the major augments, we have Dead First, which deals double critical hit damage if an enemy's at full health. Now, I have got Dead First at B tier yet again, just like we did with Dead Draw. I do think that Dead First is good for snipers and explosive weapons, but aside from that, I don't think it offers much use for other guns in the game, so I have to put Dead First here at B tier. Nice novelty, but not something that I would run. Now, next up, we're going to look at Deadhead. This is the first major augment in Deadshot, which further increases critical hit damage on enemies. It goes without saying, but if you haven't predicted it so far, I'm not really sure how, because this is an S tier augment. It is an incredible damage buff for free, and it's always worth taking and makes Deadshot one of the best perks in the game, period. I don't really have anything to say about Deadhead, other than that you should probably be using this if you're using Deadshot. But with that out of the way, we have our last augment here for Deadshot, which is going to be Dead Set, which is going to reduce gun movement while doing advanced movement. For Dead Set, I have this an F tier. I literally have no reason to ever run this augment, and I would recommend that you don't ever use this. I think Dead Set is so just incredibly useless, especially when you have Dead Break. I just don't see why you would ever put this on. This is like the you're throwing of the augments here. Now, moving on to PhD Flopper, we're going to talk about the Dr. Ram augment. Tactical Sprint knocks down and damages base zombies when you run into them. This is an interesting augment, and I've got it ranked at E tier because it does knock zombies down, but it's not smooth and you get caught on them for a split second, which always tends to just get you hit. It's almost like the baby maker in Shangri-La when you'd run into those. I don't know if it was on the BO1 version or BO3 version, but there was one of them where you would run into them and you'd get caught for a millisecond and it would get you screwed on high rounds. That's basically what's happening here. Now, next up, we're going to be talking about Juggernog, the one and only, and we're going to be looking at durable plates. This is a very, very nice augment. It is ranked at S tier because it is just an extremely useful, very noticeable buff. You can't really go wrong using durable plates on Jug. It is really, really nice. And you know what? I'm liking doing the whole S tier augment stuff, so let's jump over to another S tier augment real fast in Quick Revive with the Dying Wish major augment. Now, this is just absolutely incredible. It is simply an invaluable augment to take, and I've got to say, it is one of those augments where there's not really anything you can argue against it other than it is just really good. Make sure you're grabbing Dying Wish on Quick Revive. I would highly, highly recommend it. Now, jumping back to Elemental Pop, we're going to take a look at the Electric Cherry augment. This is what it says on the tin. It is the return of Electric Cherry, and I've got this at B tier. While Electric Cherry is great as a perk, as an augment it gets outshined really fast, and that's how I feel about it in Black Ops 6. I don't think this is bad by any means, but I just think because of what it's up against with Elemental Pop, which is basically just two major augments which are S tier, I don't think that Electric Cherry is ever going to get much play except for nostalgia, but for me, nostalgia is not enough to make me pick this. Now, next up in Quick Revive, we're taking a look at the EMT major augment, and EMT as an augment is actually really good. I think this is an A tier augment. It's invaluable for co-op because it makes it so that when you revive an ally, it allows them to keep all of their perks on the bleed out bar, and I do think this is invaluable for co-op. It's just a very, very good choice. I don't think it's the best of the Quick Revive augments per se, but I do think for co-op this is going to be really, really handy, especially in boss fights for your teammates. So overall, yeah, the EMT augment, very nice, gets a good rank from me. Next up in PhD Flopper, we're taking a look at something on a slightly lower note here, Environmentalist. Become immune to environmental damage while sliding. I have got this augment at F tier. I hate this augment. Literally, why would I ever need to be immune to environmental damage? It is just a genuinely horrible augment and a waste of a slot. I don't see where I would ever need this unless there is some kind of hidden use case that I don't know about for PhD's Environmentalist augment here, which if there is, trust me, let me know. I see zero use to having this on. Really, really not worth my time. I would never, ever select this augment. And while we're in PhD, let's talk about EOD Technician. It reduces the height and distance requirements for explosions to be triggered, and I've got this just one step above F at E tier. I rarely ever see it work for me, but I'm not saying it doesn't work at all. I just don't notice the buff that it's actually giving me. So for that reason alone, I just would not recommend using it. It's not something which is entirely noticeable right off the bat, at least again, not to me. And that's why I've got this here at E tier. EOD Technician version, yeah, I'm not a fan. Now next up in quick revive, we've got equivalent exchange. I've got this at A tier. It makes it so that if you have quick revive while downed, you basically have self-medication from Black Ops 3, where if you get a kill, it will revive you and then it's going to remove quick revive. You can do this up to 3 times, and I've got this at A tier. I think it's a great take on self-medication, and I think it's really good overall. So for that reason, I would recommend running equivalent exchange as well if you really want to. Now moving on, we have Espresso. This is the first major augment for melee macchiato, and for good reason. It is S tier. This is an incredible DPS increase for melee, helping you kill things way faster with your knife, which you should be using with melee macchiato because it does get that buff as well. Just a really solid augment, and honestly the only one that I like to run on this perk if I do grab it. So yeah, definitely go ahead and grab Espresso. S tier, you really cannot go wrong unless you're using the baseball bat, because the baseball bat is just terrible. Now back into Speed Cola, we're taking a look at the fast pitcher augment, and I've got this at B tier. Now this basically makes it so that you can deploy equipment faster, but I personally would not take this. It's just not a huge benefit to warrant running it in my opinion, so I've got it here at B tier. I'm not the biggest fan of fast pitcher for Speed Cola, unfortunately. And on that same note, in Stamina Up, we're taking a look at the Free Faller augment. This is B tier. It's great, but it's very niche and has little use cases where it's actually needed. It just makes you immune to fall damage, which in my opinion should just be a feature of PhD at the end of the day, and I don't think it's worth running this on Stamina Up. There are some areas in Terminus where you need this, but that's only if you do fall, which is not really that hard to avoid. So I did like this at first, but upon further testing with it, it just doesn't really warrant being used. So I've got it at B tier. Next up, back in PhD Flopper, we're going to talk about the Gravity MD augment. This makes it so that you can just fall from heights to create explosions. You don't need to do a flop. You don't need to go and do the dolphin dive. You can just literally jump off of a staircase, for example, to do the explosion. And you might be surprised, but for Gravity MD, I've got this at B tier. I do think this could be good, but overall, it's just not a very useful augment to me. While it does do what it says on the tin, and it does work, and it does make it a little bit safer to use PhD Flopper, the same problem with the perk is still there at the end of the day, so I have to put this in B tier. Next up, we're back in Stamina Up for the Hard Target augment. This makes it so that while tactical sprinting, your projectile damage is reduced, and this basically means incoming damage from manglers, for example. And again, you might be surprised with this one, but for Stamina Up, Hard Target, I've got it ranked at A tier. I think it's really great for not getting destroyed by manglers, which are just spammed at high rounds currently. So I wanted to put it in A tier just for that alone, because manglers seriously can mess you up on a high round. I have been one-shotted by them before. I don't know if that's a bug or what, but I have got one-shot by a mangler. So if this can help prevent that, then absolutely. Now next up, we're going to Juggernog, because we are going to talk about hardened plates. This makes it so that you have more damage mitigation on your armor plates, and I've got this at A tier. I think it's very good and a useful augment to run overall. I don't have much bad to say about this one. I do think that durable plates is just better than hardened plates, but overall I do like hardened plates too. I wouldn't fault you for using either or. And so next up, we have Hidden Impact for the Melee Macchiato perk. This is going to make it so that your melee kills can reload a portion of your held weapon, and I've got this at E tier. I think if you're going for a melee build, this is extremely pointless to take, and I think even if you're running a gun build but you just have the Melee Macchiato perk, I think it's just way more convenient to go to an ammo crate and buy ammo, or just straight up swap out your gun. I don't think I would ever need this. I'm tempted to put it in F tier, but I don't really want to speak for everybody. Maybe for me it was more F than it is E, but I'm going to be generous and keep it in E anyway. I just don't see a reason why I would ever need to use Hidden Impact on Melee Macchiato. And now back to Stamina Up, we're talking about the Hot Foot augment. This is going to give you a speed boost after your equipment kills an enemy, and I'm pretty sure we just mentioned just like something I would never need or never use, and this is another one of those. I have it at C tier because while it could be useful, it's not something I would freak out over not having, and I don't think I would run an equipment build to need this to be used in my loadout. Some of these perk augments are just really bizarre, and this is another one of them. I just would never want to use this. And now back to Elemental Pop, and we have the Imperial Peach augment. It makes it so that enemies that hit you have a chance to trigger trigger a random ammo mod. And I've got this at A tier. I think if you are not running Citrus Focus, you should probably just run this. While I'm not the biggest fan of it, I do think that it is very, very nice to have and serves as a form of survivability. So, big recommend. And next, for quick revive, we have Karmic Return. Reviving an ally is going to heal you to full health. Now, I've got Karmic Return sitting in at B tier. I think it's really good if you're getting hit during the revive on your teammate, but I think if you're not, it's kind of useless. I don't see too much use outside of that situation, which is why I've got it in B tier. And now taking a look at Speed Cola's major augment Phantom Reload. Weapon magazines are slowly refilled over time. I have got this in at B tier also. I think it's very novelty and I'd almost never want to run this in my games. If it does it for you, then I think that's great. But for me, I do think this is very novelty and it's not something I would want on in my loadout. Something which I might want in my loadout though is the PhD Flopper Augment PhD Slider, which I have at S tier. This is the best PhD Flopper Augment in the game. It is all around solid and the only major augment you should be running on this perk in my opinion. It's not even that crazy in the grand scheme of things, but for PhD it is by far the best augment you have at your disposal. It just turns PhD into PhD Slider from Black Ops 4, where sliding into enemies triggers explosions as well. So very, very good all around, and I do like PhD Slider. But next up, let's return back to Elemental Pop and get back on track here with Pineapple Blast. It makes it so that your equipment can also trigger a random ammo mod. I'm gonna be honest, I've got Pineapple Blast at E tier. I think if you're doing an equipment build, which no one really is, this is fine. But if you're not doing an equipment build, which, I mean, again, no one is, then this is kind of useless. So I've got Pineapple Blast at E tier. Again, tempted to put it in F, but I'll leave it at E just in case. Now let's get some good news in here and talk about Probiotic for Juggernog. This is going to slightly increase your maximum health. I believe is up to 300, and you already know where I'm going with this. This is an S tier. Just unarguable, an S tier augment for Juggernog. The fact that it's just a free health boost is huge, and I don't see how you can really argue against that or make a case for it being too much work. It's just a put on and have fun. It's really, really good and a way to make the game easier if that's what you're looking for also. So, Probiotic for Juggernog at S tier. And now back into Stamina Up, we have the Quarterback Minor Augment. This is going to allow you to use equipment while you're sprinting, and unfortunately for Stamina Up, I have got Quarterback at F tier. I would never ever want to use Quarterback, and I see literally zero use case for it, period. This might be one of the worst augments in Black Ops 6, and until I see otherwise, some kind of proof or some kind of aura defining video where I'm like, okay, I should put that on, Quarterback is by far one of the worst augments in the game. However, something which I think might be one of the best perk augments is Quick Swap for Speed Cola. It allows you to swap weapons faster, and this is all around for me an A tier. I do like it. I think it's very good, especially if you're using heavier weapons in the game. And this includes stuff like the jet gun on Liberty Falls, for example. I do think that Quick Swap would be very, very handy to have in a loadout, and I think you should really consider taking it too. I like this augment a lot. Now next up in Jug, we're going to talk about Reactive Armor. This is a major augment which is going to make it so that when one of your armor plates break, nearby normal enemies are going to be knocked down and stunned for a short time. Now I got to say, unfortunately for Juggernog, I have to give Reactive Armor an E tier. I think it's super gimmicky and not something I'd ever need, and I think it has a very, very little use case. I could see it being useful maybe in some boss fights, but for me it's just not something I'd actually ever go and put on. Now next up, looking at Juggernog, we're going to look at Retaliation. This is going to make it so that you deal bonus damage while your health is low, and I've got this at B tier. Now the reason I've got this at B tier is because it is really good, but also very situational, and unfortunately if you're a zombies player like me, who, no flex, doesn't get hit too often, and I'm really hoping that the gameplay backs up what I'm saying right now.
But the point is, if you're someone who's not getting hit very often, this is just not going to be procced for you to use, meaning you're wasting a slot. So I would not recommend running Retaliation on Juggernog, especially when there's hardened plates and durable plates. Just don't waste your time. Go with those instead. They are much more better than this and are going to have more uptime too. Now, next up in Quick Revive, we're going to take a look at Slow Death. This is going to increase your time in Last Stand. It's very simple in what it does, but I have this at A tier. It's a great way to protect the person with the perk, but also a great way to buy their teammate time to come and revive them. So it's one of those perks which is not only going to help you out, but it's also going to help your team out as well, and I think that is really cool, unless you're in solo and have no friends. Now, next up, it's been a while since we've done Speed Cola, it feels like, so let's go back there for Speedy Roulette. This is going to make the mystery box settle much faster. It's basically Time Slip from Black Ops 4, and I'm going to put this in at B tier. So like I mentioned, it is just like Time Slip from Black Ops 4 for the mystery box, but not if you're no longer box pulling. Like if you're on high rounds and you don't need anything from the box anymore, or if you're just not hitting the box in general, then this isn't going to be very useful to you. So I'll give you an example of this. I have the LR on my loadout, I go into my Game of Liberty 4s, that's the gun I'm going to upgrade, and then I craft the jet gun. So I would never hit the box, meaning this would just be a dead slot if I took it, so that's why I've got it at B tier. But if you're a serial box addict, then be sure to just go ahead and grab Speedy Roulette. It is really nice and a good increase to the box rolling speed. Now back into stamina, we have the Stalker Augment, which is going to make you move faster while aiming, and I've got this in at A tier. This is a really good augment to keep momentum when you're aiming, and a solid passive buff as well. It's nice not feeling like you're just instantly slowed down, and it is going to increase your survivability too for that very reason. So I've got this in at A tier. Very nice. But moving on, we're going to go back to Melee Macchiato here for Stick and Move. This is going to make your backpedal speed increased after a successful melee attack, and I've got this ranked at A tier. It is good all around, and I can see some use cases for it with the Omni movement system. I don't think that melee has the most augments here that are useful to the player, but this is one which I can see a good use case for, so A tier I think is going to be fitting for it. Now, next up on Melee Macchiato, we're going to talk about Strength Training. Your punch can one-hit kill normal enemies for more rounds. Now, gotta be honest, Strength Training I think is C tier. To me, this buff does not last long enough, and I've gotta be honest, I think it's a waste of a point to take because of that. I have tried this in my games. It can last up into the early 20s, which sounds like a good thing, but it's honestly, I really don't think it is, because the knife just melees so quick, which means it's just a better idea to just pull your knife out instead. So yeah, it's really hard for me to get behind Strength Training. I just can't in good conscience recommend this to you. Skip this augment. Now, moving on to Speed Cola, we're going to be talking about the Supercharged Augment. Field upgrades recharge a bit faster. I've got this at A tier. Now, I will say, while I can't tell a huge gap difference between with and without Supercharged, I will say it is there. I do notice it slightly, and it is nice to have in general. It's hard for me to call this a bad augment because it does help. It does do what it says it does, and for that, I do have to give it A tier. Now, next up, we're going to be talking about Swift Recovery. This is an augment for the Quick Revive perk, which is going to make it so that when you revive an ally, both of you get movement speed boosts for a short time. Now, I've got Swift Recovery at A tier because this is a really insane buff. It makes you super fast, and it's great for getting out of a bad situation. It almost feels like it times your movement speed by 3, and you just zoom around like Sonic for a short amount of time. It's really handy, and while I haven't tried this in solo to see what happens, I do know that in co-op this is really good as is. And now next up in PhD Flopper, we're going to be talking about Tribologist. This is going to increase your sliding distance and also increase the speed of your sliding. I've got this at B tier because it is good for movement, but in my opinion, the sliding in this game feels super clunky and delayed, and I just hate everything sliding related, so for me, this offers no benefit. There's no reason why I would actually want this. So I've got it at B tier for that very reason. But if you're a big sliding person, you might like this a lot. Now we're back to Melee Macchiato here to take a look at the triple shot augment. This is a major augment which makes it so that your punch can hit multiple enemies at once, and I've got triple shot at B tier. I do think it's good, but on high rounds you're most likely going to be knifing anyway, just like you will period when using Melee Macchiato, which means focusing in on the punch. It's just, to me at least, I just find it to be a little pointless to focus on, because knifing is just so good. I can't in good conscience recommend using something and focusing in on the punch, but maybe I'm just in the minority there. But to me, they haven't really solved the issue with melee on high rounds, at least for raw melee like this in Black Ops 6, and yeah, the knifing is just still king. But we've only got 3 augments left, so let's lock in on them. Firstly, we're going to be taking a look at Juggernog with the turtle shell augment. This is going to make it so that your armor acts as a shield on your back, like the shield mechanic from other games, and it's going to completely absorb damage to your back. So this is basically going to return you to the classic normal jug and then shield gameplay, and I've got to say, sadly for Turtle Shell, I have it at C tier because it just doesn't fit my playstyle. While I am a fan of Classic Zombies gameplay, Classic Zombies gameplay doesn't mean role-playing a shield on my back. I actually want a shield on my back, and while I do get a similar effect with Turtle Shell, it's not quite the same for me, so I just don't really use this, especially when probiotic exists as well. But if you do like that, this is a way to make it feel like the good old days. And yeah, Turtle Shell, I've got this in at C tier. Now the next one is going to be on Melee Macchiato again. This is Vampiric Extraction, and it's going to make melee attacks heal a small amount of your health. Now sadly, I'd like to have better things to say about Melee Macchiato, but I just don't. This is C tier. It is good on paper, but I have tested it in high rounds and it's just not worth running. There is so much going on in high rounds that even meleeing to get your health back just isn't very worth it. Now it is useful for what it says it does, and I'm sure on low rounds you can get some nice use cases out of it, but on high rounds, which is what I'm all about, this just does not do it for me. I don't think I would ever really want to run this either. Sadly, you know, I'd love to vouch for melee more, but I just can't see myself ever needing this. And lastly, to finish off the video, we have Elemental Pop's Vulnera Bean Minor Augment. This is going to further increase enemies' elemental weaknesses damage. So basically, if you are hitting an enemy which is weak to Napalm Burst with Napalm Burst, and you have Vulnera Bean on, it's going to increase the damage that the enemy takes from your Napalm Burst. Now we're ending on a high note here because I've got Vulnera Bean at A tier. I think it's very good and useful for mini bosses especially. It is really handy given the overwhelming spam of manglers in the game, for example. That right there is where you're going to get a lot of use out of this augment, and that's exactly why I have to recommend it. And with that, that is going to do it for all of the augments in Black Ops 6 at launch. Now that ties everything up there. I'm very happy to get this video out because next we're probably going to be taking a look at all of the gobblegums in the game, but I wanted to get this out to help you guys a lot because I know some people right now, they are making videos looking for the best augment combos, the best augments to run, so I figured why not rank every single augment in the game. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this, and if you did, please leave a like on the video and sub to the channel because we are trying to hit 60k. And when I release my gobblegum ranking, you're gonna want to see some of my picks in there because I think it's gonna trigger some people. So be sure to sub so that when I release that video, you get it in your subscription box. I'll be sure to send it to you specifically. And with that, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you're still in that game you were in when you started this video, let me know what round you got up to from, you know, the start of the video to now. But anyway, take it easy and I'll see you all in the next one.